Hi, it's Ralph and Lonnie D'Amicis, back with another episode of Planetary Calendar. This time we're going to talk about the forecast for May 2018.
Yes,
Take it away, Ralph.
and it's a very interesting month that we have ahead. So let me read you the forecast on the planetary calendar. Keep in mind we wrote this a year ago. After a tumultuous winter and early spring, May is thankfully low turbulence. Numerous planets move from fiery Aries into pastoral Taurus, including Uranus after his long sojourn in Aries. This creates a more satisfying social environment. Warning, Uranus is retrograding into Aries in November, so we are not finished with that message, the transformation of personal expression. Uranus in Taurus can mean uproar in the natural world, earthquakes and weather events. Also, Taurus rules fixed assets, such as real estate. During its last Taurus transit, 1934 to 1942, it was the time of the Great Depression. This time, Uranus transit Taurus from 2018 to 2024. On the 4th, the Sun trine Moon gives a push to projects, so take advantage of that. The Black Box Day on the 7th could make Monday problematic between workers and bosses. Mercury enters Taurus on the 13th, Mother's Day. So remember those flowers, but order them early because that Mercury conjunct Uranus could cause communication problems and overloads. On the 15th, the new moon coincides with Uranus entering Taurus, so there is a seismic shift in how we translate between the physical and the spiritual. Mars enters Aquarius that day, so physical actions may get erratic. Beware of arguments between siblings and close friends. The White Circle Day on the 18th is great for practical accomplishments. Venus enters Cancer on the 19th, softening our personal relationships, adding some nurturing and comfy slippers. So spend the day with people you love. On the 20th, the Sun enters Gemini, so events speed up, lists get made, notes get passed. The 24th and 25th are days to start new projects and get things moving, listen to other people's opinions and make deals. The full moon on the 29th aligns with two of the royal stars, which could propel this normally playful time of the year into greater drama. The Black Box Day on the 30th denotes a time to coast while staying internally centered.
I think you made a great point in this forecast talking about the previous Uranus transits in Taurus being a significator of how astrologers work for the timing of things in the mundane world. You know, we look back at times in history when similar aspects or transits have happened and what kinds of things were happening in the world and kind of bring them up to date for the modern world. So while the Depression was between 1934 and 1942 when the last time that Uranus was in Taurus, we're looking to see that again from the years 2018 to 2024. Doesn't necessarily mean a depression, but some kind of financial indicators like that are possible with this kind of transit. And why? Taurus is about resources in the bank, your assets.
Real estate.
And Uranus is a disruptor. So you just want to know that these things are on the horizon so that you can plan ahead a little bit. You know, maybe change up the risk factor in investments or things like that.
Exactly. And it's important to realize, too, that, Uranus and Taurus does not mean that everything's going to go down the tubes, because there are going to be some opportunities. After all, the game Monopoly was started during the Depression. There's actually a number of great businesses that were started during the Depression because it was people adapting to these very difficult situations. But there could be real issues in terms of increased weather events because Uranus is disruptive. Taurus is the natural world, the earth, it's weather, it's the land, things like earthquakes. But also, as Lonnie said, it relates to banks, to real estate, to fixed assets, to the financial world. And this is happening at the same time that Saturn is in Taurus. Saturn is in Capricorn. So it's trine, it's another earth sign, and Saturn is a compressive sign. So Taurus is naturally receptive. It pulls in, it consolidates. And then you have Saturn doing the same thing, and they're working cooperatively to a certain extent. So, you know.
So I think it bodes well for May, at least, that the month starts off with that white circle day with the sun trine moon. You know, the sun in an earth sign, Taurus, and the moon in Capricorn really tends to add a bit of stability in the unstable world. You know, it can really kind of set the tone for May if you pay attention to that.
Yeah.
You know, draw upon, you know, the placement of your Saturn, the placement of Capricorn in your chart, the placement of Taurus in your chart to find that equilibrium and balance that you're going to need.
Right, and the way you find out where Taurus is in your chart is whatever your rising sign is you have to measure from there. And you know, you count around the chart, and it will tell you what house, so to speak, what section of your life is going to go through some type of transformation. If it's going over your midheaven, it means that your career will go through some type of transformation. If it goes through your fifth house, it means that your love life, or that which you enjoy, will go through some type of transformation. And remember, Uranus is not fast. This is a transit that goes on for several years. So when it gets there, it keeps teaching the lesson for a while. It's not like Mercury or Venus. Mercury goes through super fast, and Venus never stays long enough. So,
well, it's funny you said that, keeps teaching the lesson, because I usually use that to describe, you know, what Saturn has to convey to us. For Uranus, I usually like to say it keeps showing us the opportunities, because
true.
it's such a new kind of an energy, a disruptive energy in terms of changing up the same old, and getting new ways to look at things. So let's embrace it as an opportunity.
That's a very good way to look at it, because one of the things we will see will be transformations in the natural world in terms of farming. Additional technology entering these fields, and understanding of the genome, and we're going to see changes in terms of how plants are produced, you know, and there's always going to be some disruption, but many times, you know, great ideas come out of disruption.
It's true. And then, of course, we go on to that black box day on the 7th. All those squares.
Oh, yes.
You know, and the moon in Aquarius, which is the modern ruler, has the modern rulership of Uranus. So Uranus is pulled into there, even though it's not aspected below the line.
But yes, Mercury square Pluto, Venus square Neptune, the Sun square the Moon. It's a great day to get stuff done, as long as you're willing to put your shoulder to it, you know.
Well, and it's a good time to just mention again that, you know, the trines and the sextiles are all sweet and nice and, oh, that was easy and all of that. But if you want things to happen, if you want things to get accomplished, if you want things to change, those squares and those oppositions are very, very important. So use them effectively.
Yeah, exactly. Now, on the 4th, you have that nice white circle day, which is a great day to coast, especially since it's Friday. This is really the day to go out to lunch, don't you think? I mean, after all, you've got the moon, the sun in Taurus, and you've got the moon in Capricorn. It's a great day to go out to lunch. Take business people along. Too bad you can't take the deduction anymore as much, right? I think. And then you have another, and then I think the real dynamic of it is the fact that the first half of the month and the second half of the month are so different.
It's true. You know, by the time the moon moves into Gemini, all that sort of relaxed, take it as it comes kind of energy goes out the window.
Yeah, you have that whole series. Mercury changes sign in quick succession. Uranus changes sign. Then Venus changes sign 13th, 15th, and 19th. Then the Sun enters Gemini on the 20th. And it's just this quick succession of planets changing sign. And Mercury...
well, I think the saving grace is that both Mercury and Uranus going into Taurus is not as kind of dynamic and create, you know, the potential for as much upheaval as if they were in other more active signs. Because Taurus really likes to stabilize.
And that's the other thing. Venus is moving into Cancer. So these are the feminine signs. They're very stabilizing. Venus, I think Taurus and Cancer are the two signs that relate most to the home, in our sense of home. So moving into those signs, these are really positive places. But like I said, there's really going to be kind of a shift. But then Mercury enters Gemini, its ruling sign, on the 29th. So Mercury's moving very fast, which means you can get projects done, like anything to do with written word, communications, contracts, when Mercury moves fast, you can get a lot of stuff done. Things move along really, really well.
Yeah, and thankfully it's direct. I mean, we've had some serious Mercury retrogrades
Yes.
of late. So,
Exactly.
anytime that Mercury is moving fast and moving forward, we're happy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the really big dynamic, and it's always like that way, when you have a major planet that has a long transit through a sign change sign. It's the big event of the month when Jupiter changed sign last year and Saturn changed sign both at near the end of the year. These were really the pivotal message of the month. But now with Uranus, which stays in the sign for 4 years, entering Taurus, once again harking back to the Great Depression, it's something you really need to pay attention to, especially because we are coming through that stage now where Saturn and Jupiter are coming towards their conjunction. Well, they'll be in the same sign in 2020, and this is the end of the 20-year Jupiter-Saturn cycle, which is basically the point of compression to expansion to compression. We're coming to the compression stage at the same time that Uranus is coming to a stage in which it's disrupting those things that we most kind of rely upon.
Well, and I'm looking at the calendar again. As Ralph said, we do all these calculations a year in advance, and I'm looking at the 15th, and I'm thinking to myself, if I did it again, maybe I would have put a black box on that day, because while Uranus is entering Taurus, Mars is also changing signs into Aquarius.
Oh,
so,
I missed that.
when we talk about turbulence, created when planets change signs, that's kind of the definition of that. And you've got that Mars squaring Uranus while both of them are changing signs. So that's kind of not a day that I would recommend to move forward with a project.
No.
Especially since Mars is so physically making that move, and Uranus is about the ideas and the change agent, and they're at loggerheads. Even that new moon isn't really that conducive for it, because that's kind of like the germination point. It's not really the move forward point. I mean, after the new moon, you start to get that kind of push forward energy. I mean, I guess we looked at that very short void of course there, and the new moon is generally an idea place, but maybe not an enactment place. So you may want to hold back on any projects moving forward on that day.
I think that's very good advice.
Wait until the 18th.
I missed that. That's part of the succession of Mercury, Mars, Venus, and the Sun changing signs
And
in a week.
Uranus.
And
They're
Uranus.
all, there's a lot of activity. So as Ralph said, the beginning of the month is kind of laid back, and then all of a sudden, everybody is on the move.
You get to the 13th, from the 13th basically to the 20th, that whole week, and most of the next weekend is going to be very turbulent. When planets change sign, there's just turbulence.
Exactly.
And it's really a time to be very conscious of that, because things will keep shifting around on you.
Exactly. And I'm glad you used the word shifting, because it's the unpredictability of that makes it not appropriate to move ahead with a new project until you're more certain.
Yeah. But at least that first 2 weeks, from the 1st to the 12th, you're golden. So take advantage of it while you can.
Well, and then afterwards you have, if you look at the Black Box Day on the 30th, it's really because she got no help. I mean, there's really nothing serious going on, and it's the day after the full moon, and it's, it's void of course all day long. So even though there aren't a lot of marks in the box that would explain why we would put a black box on that day, there's just not enough help, and there's enough distraction with that. That's a serious void of course from,
It's Sag.
Yeah.
So when you go out to work, when you're at work and you go out to lunch and you come back late and your boss says, "What happened?" You point at the calendar and said, "It's because the moon was void of course in Sag all day.
That's
and
it.
I got distracted."
We'll write you a note.
We'll write you a note, exactly. And finally, that full moon on the 29th, that's aligned with two of the powerful fixed stars, what's called the royal stars. And I don't want to go into a great detail here, but there is a tendency when you get these alignments for a dramatic events to take place. You just kind of, it lifts it to a different level. You see this in people's charts, that they have a major royal star, a major fixed star aligned with their sun, their moon. You might look at the chart and think it's not remarkable, and yet they do remarkable things, and it's the influence of these stars. It's quite remarkable that they affect us that way. So
So to view this again or to get more information, visit us at spaceandtime.com, and we'll see you again next time for Planetary Calendar. Hi, we're Ralph and Lonnie D'Amicus with another Astrological Minute, or 10. And today we thought we would talk about the big three. You know, what is your sun, moon, and rising sign, and what has it done for you lately? I mean, these are the most personal parts of your chart, and they're frankly what people first learn about. I mean, just beyond sun sign astrology, you get to the sun, moon, rising triumvirate, and that gives you a lot of in-depth look at you and your personality and your identity.
And realize that this is part of the basic trilogy that we see throughout nature, that tendency for things to happen in threes, after all. You know, the good things happen in threes, bad things happen in threes. Well, sun, moon, rising, you know, and it's basically the sun is your spirit, the rising is your physical body, and the moon is your emotions.
So in that vein, you know, the sun can give you insights into your sense of self and character, your ego, your identity. But as you view yourself and as you, deal with the world from your personal perspective. Whereas the rising sign really can give you insights into your physical appearance or your physical location or how you relate to your physical neighborhood, your area where you are. And the moon, of course, is your emotional nature. We see the effects of the moon on the planet with the tides and things like that, and we have fluid in the body that goes on a cycle, and it's easy to relate that to your emotions.
In some ways, an easy way to think of it is that the sun traditionally relates in some ways to the father. Well, this is very traditional in society, but it was the idea that whatever kind of work your father did was the kind of work that you were going to do. If you came from a family of carpenters, good chance you were going to be a carpenter. If you came up from a family of fishermen, you were going to be a fisherman. That solar central sense
Identity,
of self.
right.
You know, how many people's last names, like Smith or Fisher or Cooper, are names that relate to that family's tradition of working in a particular area. That doesn't really necessarily tell you who the person is, but it does tell you their position in the cosmos, you might say. And I think that's an easy way to think of it. Where the moon, think of how close the word moon is to mother. And so many words that have that connection, emotions. And we learn a lot about our emotional nature and how we relate to the world emotionally from our mother and from the women in our lives, because the men are out there in the world, and the mothers are the ones who give birth to us and then take care of us and raise us up to a certain point until we're ready to start a career, and then we're handed off to the father.
Now, maybe to be a little bit more politically correct in this day and age, we should say that the sun is an indicator in a chart of the person who taught you how to be out in the world.
Right.
And the moon is an indicator of the person who taught you to love and feel loved and deal with your inner world.
And to be at home, even. You know, where the moon oftentimes relates to how we live within our home.
And sometimes the genders of that are not exactly aligned with the old preconceived ideas of masculine and feminine. And so this is a different way to look at that. And then, of course, we get to the rising, which is kind of your personality. I mean, we do a 3-number numerological system that has a character number, a motivation number, and a personality number. And it really relates to the sun, moon, and rising in your chart, the energy, not the exact sun sign or moon sign or rising sign in your chart, but the energy of this numerological pattern relates to the same kind of emotional feeling that these planets would indicate.
It's funny because when you say the sun sign, there's one word of saying it. The moon sign, there's one way of saying it. But when you get to the rising sign, you can say the rising sign, or you can say the ascendant, or the ascending sign, or the ascending degree, because it's a mathematical point. It's basically that point on the eastern horizon in the chart, or when you read a chart, it's the line all the way to the left, which would show the eastern horizon. In some ways, relates to a very early morning. It's when the sun pops up over the horizon in your personal life, or when your eyes open up and you go, oh, here I am. That's the ascendant. How do you see the world? How are you seen in the world? And it has a lot to do with physical appearance.
That's a very important point, because no matter where your sun falls within the houses of your chart, the ascendant is the ascendant and marks the first house. So,
And in terms of physicality, and it's so important because this idea of, you only make a first impression first, once. Well, it's very true. And the planets that you find by the rising, is Mars rising, is Venus rising, is Uranus rising. The planets near that rising have a lot to do with how you're seen in the world. For instance, people with the sun rising tend to bring a lot of energy to their first experience. It's a great sign for salesmen, though maybe not quite as good as Mars rising, because sales takes a lot of bravery. So Mars rising means you bring a lot of physical energy to that first meeting, Now, maybe they're not as good at continuing things into the future, but they're great for that first handshake and for that first discussion, because so much energy is concentrated there. And it's interesting, when you look at the charts of very famous salespeople, so many of them are born right by the rising, very close to the ascending sign. Their sun is there, or they have a cluster of planets right there, because they bring a lot of energy to that initial experience.
well, and your sun in the first house is kind of what you see is what you get.
Yes.
There's a lot of times, when you meet someone physically in the world, you're actually first meeting their first house, their rising sign, their personality, what they want to show to the world, the way that they see the world and the way they are seen by the world. But then when you add the sun to that component, that's their identity and their calling and their their characters. So you really get a feeling like that person very quickly when they have the sun there. And if their moon is in the first house, close to the rising sign, you get a feeling of a very emotional person, like an intuitive person, or a very person who can really understand your feelings very easily, because their moon is the first thing that you meet. And so you get to feel like you know them on an emotional level much sooner than someone who might have the moon in the 10th house or the 8th house.
Now, the sun moves a degree per day, very steady. The moon actually changes a degree about every 2.5 hours. So it goes to maybe 12 degrees in a day, or sometimes less. The moon actually varies its speed a little bit. What does this sound like? Chessboards. The sun is the king. The king moves one step up at a time. But the queen, the moon, can go all the way across the board and change here and do all kinds of things. And it has a lot to do with that difference between that solar self, we are who we are, and our emotional self, which changes direction a lot, and you never know where it's going to be, and it's going to be flexible and adjust. And it's like how people see us in the world. If a person's in a profession, that's their sun. But how, what's their family like? You come in and you walk into their office, and there's the sign on the door saying what they do. But then you come in, and there behind their desk, there's a picture of all their family and their kids and their cousins, and there's this whole complex mix of things. And this is really the big difference. It's the sun, moon, spirit, soul in many ways.
And I think we should talk just for a minute about the rising, because the rising degree changes 1 degree of the sign every 4 minutes.
Yes.
So it used to be that people would come, they would arrange a consultation with us, and we would calculate the charts in advance. They'd take 3 hours or so to calculate by hand. Some of the more complicated charts that we use nowadays would take up to 10 hours to calculate by hand.
Computers are so cool.
And so the person would finally come, at the time they're supposed to come for a consultation. They say, oh, silly me, I found out that I wasn't born at 8 a.m. I was born at 8 p.m. Does it make a difference? We go, yeah, go away. Come back in a week. I mean, we have to recalculate all of the charts that we calculated, because every 4 minutes there's a different degree on the rising or on the ascendant. So you can imagine for 12 hours, you're totally not, Taurus rising anymore. I mean, that's, just a given. So
that's a different person.
So anything that we had prepared or had in our mind, thank goodness we have computers now. We
Yes.
can calculate that in a minute. And in fact, you know, if you don't know your sun, moon, rising, there are many chart services that can calculate that for you. And at least you can figure out the symbols, the glyphs for the sun, moon, and rising. And you can figure out those three dynamics of your chart, even if you don't have the opportunity to delve into your chart a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, and in fact, you actually know that when, like for instance, in the planetary calendar, that when the moon is going through the sign of either your moon or your rising, it will tend to be a more emotional day for you, in a good way, hopefully in a good way. And that's, if you know that, you kind of couch your life in that way and make sure you're going to be around people who you like.
And I'm glad you brought up using the calendar, because when you're using the calendar, of course, above the number are the glyphs, the symbols that denote the planets.
Yep.
And it's one thing to use those glyphs to find the ruler of your sun sign, but you can also use them for the ruler of your rising or your moon to determine what days or actions might be appropriate for you.
In some ways, the planets that are above the number are basically which kids are getting along with mom that day.
Because it's how they relate to the moon, where the moon is.
And because the moon changes sign, you know, moves so fast, that changes, just like in a family, you know, who's your favorite kid today? You know, I love all my kids the same, but today...
Well, and it changes signs completely in every 2.5 days.
Exactly.
So that's a fast-moving, energetic flow.
Now, there's one other point. Most people know that, you know, the sun, moon, rising, they know about that. But there's actually another point which is very important, which is in the ancient times, and all the way through medieval astrology as well, was considered very important, was the midheaven. And the midheaven is basically another mathematical point like the ascendant, but it's directly over your head. And the way I like to describe it is like the flag above your castle, because it says, what is my career path going to be? You know, you could be born to be a fisherman, but maybe your father had one boat and you have Saturn at the midheaven and Leo, and you want to have 20 boats, you know, because it's at the midheaven. It has to do with how are you going to fulfill your responsibilities in the world, how are you going to climb the cliffs of career. And traditionally, this was always considered one of the four most important points, along with the sun, moon, rising. And in some ways, I think, depending upon the person, it can be more important if a person's really, you know, their life is really focused on career or on duty.
Well, and it doesn't mean that whatever the rising sign is going to determine what your midheaven or your career in the end is going to be. It's interesting sometimes to look at and see how one is what you were born into, kind of out of no choice of your own, except for that, you know, cosmic choice that you make to incarnate at that time. And the other one is more what you develop your skills in. And so they can be very different. So it can give us a lot of interesting insights into kind of what your parents might want you to be and what you want to do in the world for your personal satisfaction and success.
And life has duality in it. That's just part of the game. So
exactly. So come visit us again, and you can always see us at spaceandtime.com, and that's another astrological minute. We made it in just a minute, didn't we?
oh yeah.
Okay.